I am honored to be here and to present some information that I hope that you will find valuable. It's a pleasure to always talk about topics that I work with on a daily basis, just about week in and week out. And I have to tell you, when the conference planners asked me to speak about this topic several months ago, maybe 8, 9 months ago, even now, I thought, yeah, absolutely. These are topics: stress, burnout, resilience, happiness, joy. These are terms we're all familiar with at some level, have lots of opinions about these, and I do a lot of work individually with people and in groups. So I thought, sure. As I started to develop this presentation, I can tell you it was a little more difficult than I thought, because I realized that what I had bit off was these are presentation topics in themselves, each one of these things. I've been around for going on 4 decades, and so it means I have lots of information, 4 decades, I should say, in the work setting. And I have lots of information that's swirling from live time in the trench work, what I do with employees week in and week out, and at all levels: leadership, management, and frontline workers. So I have all kinds of information. So the good news was, after a little bit of that struggle, it worked out really well, I think, because what I realized is that all these topics collide together. They all collide together in a sense that they're eminently important to all of us. However, we often think about them as separate kinds of issues, but the solutions are the same portal, the same path. In other words, we can find lots of ways to be unhappy and stressed and burnt, but we can only find a limited path about what helps us to reduce all those issues and maintain a sense of general happiness and joy in spite of adversity. And because I've counseled people for most of my career and worked in every setting: inpatient, psychiatric, outpatient, residential adult kids, gang kids in Chicago, private practice work, a little bit of group mental health work, worked in all these different settings, I have a very broad view of human nature. And when I worked in those positions, I often was not fond of having 2 or 3 jobs at a time in the younger years to build up that experience. On the other hand, it gave me an invaluable scope, a depth and breadth of human behavior, how complex we are, sometimes how simple we are, other times the enormous complexity of who we are regarding our personalities, our perceptions, and our behaviors. So today, it's my hope to be able to bring these topics together in a way that makes meaningful sense to you, applicable in some way, shape, or form that may be slightly different than prior to the presentation. I have to forewarn you now, if you hear these and you go, oh boy, these same terms that sometimes have been overused, and I cringe sometimes to use the terms because they have been overused, and especially resilience right now. Most employees I know in healthcare or any industry have to be careful with the word resilience, because when employees hear the word resilience, we often think of, you want me to do more with less, or change something, or something that's new or different, changing job task or hours. And so it has a negative connotation. And I want to kind of change that a little bit about what resilience behaviors actually mean, no matter what. So with that, let me first start off by saying I have no disclosures here, financial or label usage, to disclose. And then look at the agenda. And it's really a conversation on my end. Even though it's a one-way for this, you'll have a chance to have comments, at the end, and certainly questions as we do a Q&A, and just general comments. But it's really a conversation, because each of you have your own views about each one of these topics, because it's part of life. You know about stress, you've experienced, you know what you do well in stress management and what you don't do so well. You know what your present view is, understanding of what stress even means. Same with burnout, resilience, retention. I understand we have a mix. We have a significant number of people in the audience who are leaders, and we have people in the audience in employee positions, non-leadership. We have specialty positions. We have phlebotomists that do the direct work, I know. And so I want to try to hit on a number of topics. I do an awful lot of work with leadership about all kinds of team-related work: culture, initiatives, change, dealing with discomfort, uncomfortable conversations, management of behaviors, all kinds, and I work with employees. Our staff does as well, and I've done a lot of presentations with employees about what do each of you do in the employee group that either makes work to where it's never perfect, just like life, but where it's relatively a good place to be in the environment, and what is it that each of us do at times that make work challenging and not so fun. And so I'll share a little bit of that. That's been my life's work in the area of specialty into the work setting, understanding human behavior in a workplace setting. But today I want to be able to do both, because no matter who we are outside of work is all about leading ourselves, if you're leading others as a leader, but also just leading ourselves through these extraordinarily difficult times, to be able to manage ourselves, our loved ones, our family members, coworkers, manage the situation at work. And I have to say, I'd be remiss if I didn't say my hat's off to all of you as I think of the positions that you all have, whether it's behind the scenes, whether it's directly with patients, whether it's planning, whether it's leadership. I can only imagine the daunting task in the last couple of years. And so the work is vital. And I certainly want to say that thank all of you and appreciate the extraordinary work that you do that probably no one else can really understand unless they're in those positions, actually doing it day in and day out. All right, so with that, I wanted to see what some of the literature search on behavioral research shows on some of these topics, to give you that. And I wanted to also bring in kind of the lifetime piece that I know from working with people and just being around, as old as I am now, to live life on my own and experience these things, but also through the intimate eyes of those people who have allowed me the privilege into their life to talk about relationships, to talk about emotions and feelings, to talk about their own stress levels with issues related to family or finances or work or family members or health or loss of loved ones. And so what I found is kind of interesting. Most of the intuitive things that I would have thought bear it out in the research. And there are a couple of counterintuitive things that the research revealed that is probably important too. So while there won't be a huge academia of research, certainly will be some overviews about what does the research kind of show with some of these topics. Now, I have to start off by doing this. People at Mayo, I do a lot of talks here in the Mayo campus, of course, and they know when I'm going to talk, I usually want to talk a little bit about the incredibleness of life itself, the mystery of life itself, and certainly the complexity of the human body, and especially the brain. The reason I do that is because sometimes I find people experience through their own eyes life in a very naive way, at times well-meaning, and say, if you just do this, if you just do what I did, this will work out. If you just do this with your kids, it'll work out. And while they mean very well, they've underestimated immediately. Or when a manager says or employee says, just do this and the employee will do this, or just explain this and they'll change their view or perception. We kind of underestimate the power of our personality and the great complexity of the neuronal system, how it impacts our emotionality and our central nervous system. And I guess because I've been in healthcare for a long time, that I like to go back to the origin or etiology of cause. So whether I'm looking at working with a leadership team, trying to figure out team issues or work culture, I want to understand the drivers. I want to understand the cause, the right diagnostic assessment, because that's the only way we're going to get the right intervention. Otherwise, we're going to get wrong interventions, just like we do in healthcare. If we have the wrong assessment, then the treatment options probably aren't going to be as effective as they would, obviously, if we would have diagnosed it correctly on the front end. So as we look at our emotionality, as we look at our thoughts about all these topics, about what does resilience mean? What about happiness, joy, contentment? What about how do we prevent ourselves from experiencing undue burnout kinds of issues at work, if at all possible? All of these things are tied up into the complexity of how our system works, or our brain works. And what's the most complicated thing in the known universe? Hands down, every science person and almost every person would say the brain, which would be correct. What we know about the brain is incredibly perplexing that we even know what we do know. It's an enclosed organ, small 3-pound organ, approximately inside a closed system that it's hard to study. It's hard to look at. And what we do know about it is incredibly surprising. However, there is much more that we don't know. But in the last couple decades, the imaging techniques, brain imaging techniques, have really shed light on a lot of these features about brain activity, given our emotional states, various structure about how the brain operates and functions and what parts do what. brain mapping, kind of like we do mapping on any other topic, to kind of brain map, what does this system do? What does this part do? How much activity? And that's invaluable. So I always want to mention the complexity, because these neurons that we talk about, 100 billion estimate, 100 trillion connections. The bottom picture is the neuron with its various tentacle connections, and the upper picture is the synaptic connections. And if you think about this, it's mind-boggling alone that everything that happens is either an electrical impulse, because these are special cells in the brain that transmit information back and forth amongst parts of the brain by these synaptic connections, and they're all electrical impulses and chemicals. And so all of life, in a sense, that's happening in our brain is a function of receiving information from our five senses that turn on the outside world inside of us to be able to engage and make sense. So it's clear that we're built to engage the world, or our five senses wouldn't make any sense. When people have deficiencies in their senses, you know what that means. They lose a piece of something. So I'm a big baby when I get a cold. When I get a head cold, I usually lose the sense of smell and taste. It's a family issue on my mother's side, so I blame her. Other people have never experienced that, and other people do have chronic, or permanent issues with reduction or loss of smell and taste. And what a difference that makes when you just lose the ability short term to smell or taste, and how much I complain about that. And the other side of it, how much gratefulness I should have for just having that sense at all, like our other senses. So when we think about the complexity of people and how we're wired together and what happens in our brain that inputs all this information from our taste, our sound, our touch, our vision, our hearing, when we think of all of that, our smell turns the world on, and how we experience that world can be similar or very diverse, very different. When we look at somebody's personality in general, we're looking at such a mix of heredity, DNA, genes. Somebody asked me not long ago, well, what gene is responsible for certain kinds of behavior? Well, there's not really a gene that's responsible for your happiness or other things. It's more of a combination of genes, and how genes that turn on or off different personality features. Are we agreeable? Are we aggressive? Are we quick to anger? Are we patient? It's a combination of different genes that impact our ability and our temperament and our dispositions. And that's incredibly complicated. And as we'll hear in the research in a little bit, at least 50% estimated of our happiness and our overall dispositions are related to our DNA structure, at least 50. That means there's other potential opportunities, so don't tune out. Good news that we have on the other end, irregardless of our disposition to be skewed one way or the other about our personality and temperament, is that we do have some great opportunity by our mindful interactions and what we think and what we say and what we do that does impact our overall and tweak our personalities, right? So our environment, the uniqueness of the environments that we grew up in, the kinds of learning we had, the kinds of good things that happened, the traumas that happened to us, all of these subjective experiences have an incredible impact on our behavior. So I always have to start with that because it's just incredibly important. And I'll leave on this note just to make sure that we understand how complex and how mysterious we are as we think about just one sense, the complexity of vision. And as we perceive things and as we experience them in our world, that vision comes from us looking outside into our environment and seeing a wave spectrum. And we just see an electromagnetic wave, and our eyes are coded to pick up a certain type of a wave that turns on visible light by the naked eye. So it's just a difference of how big the wave is on the top and the trough and the bottom. And we are coded like a DVD or a VHS machine. So when we see that, it comes in through our complicated eye process and our lens and our cones and our rods, and it goes down into our retina, this visible wave, and it triggers photoreceptive cells to go along the optical nerve that travels to the back of our brain and shows a picture of what we're looking at in the back of our brain. So I used to tell my kids when they were young, we do have eyes in the back of our head, and that is real. And so when you look at just that mystery itself, no different than putting a VHS tape into a VHS recorder, and it will play because the receiver, the VHS player, which is really outdated, right? The DVD players become outdated. is coded to turn it on. If you put a VHS in a DVD, nothing will happen because it's not coded to pick up the signals. So as we think about that for a minute, and that's the same with all of our senses, and they all have a very, very specific function to keep us okay, to keep us safe, to try to keep us alive and well. That's the reason these senses exist to begin with, and they allow us to sense a piece of joy and contentment and happiness, different moments of that because of our senses, which we could talk a lot more about. But we also have to remember that this complicated process sends signals to our central nervous system, and our central nervous system then is unique to each of us, and how we perceive something and our cognition, how it affects our emotions, and how that information is transmitted to our central nervous system, and different hormones are released, stress hormones that make us alert or vigilant. And I'll come back to that, but it's really, really important in the uniqueness of who you are and how you respond versus other people. So stress. Human body is organized in a way to utilize stress reactions for our protection, for our good. So to me, it's nonsensical when I hear people talk about eliminating stress. I'm like, would we talk about that to eliminate the respiratory system, the cardiovascular system? Of course not. Our immune system, we wouldn't do that. Our stress system is built on purpose, like every other system in the body that we've identified, which is our central nervous system, which is the command center of the body, right? All information comes into the central nervous system. It controls our bodily functions that we need to survive, and it controls our thought process and our emotional life, right? Responses, and ultimately our behavior that we end up performing, saying, or doing. So the next piece there, the misuse of this human stress system leads to various emotional health and life problems. And at first, that probably sounds a little strange, misuse, right? So misuse of the system, and what does that mean? I'll just give you a glimmer. That means when we treat it in a way that we don't understand it, and we end up making matters worse by certain kinds of worry, what we're triggering automatically in our system to activate. When we worry about things past or present too much or excessively, we end up releasing more stress hormones into our bodies, and then we focus in on the symptomology, not the origin of cause. And then we get more alarmed at symptomology, increased heart rates and palpitations, and nausea in the stomach because our bodies are getting ready to fight or flight, and so blood diverts to go to the muscle mass. All the things that the system's supposed to do, but it's been mistriggered by us, in a sense, by what we're saying to ourselves and what we're feeling, because we are feeling creatures. And we can talk a lot about that, but our brain codes feelings all the time, and it expresses it during our conscious day as well as our nighttime dreaming, which we could give a whole topic about our emotional states and dreaming, right? Stress. I just want to go back to this very basic. Remember, stress is really a science engineering term. That was the original intent of the word stress, especially during the industrial kind of revolution. We had lots of experiments in science looking at how much pressure or tension you put on an object, an item, before that object loses, its original ability, its strength, its shape, its form, right? And that really is the point of where stress came from. We apply most things that happen in our outside world to our personal, intimate world, and that's where we talk about things like resilience and stress. So as we think about stress, for us, it's more of a state of a mental, emotional, or tension resulting from some adverse or difficult, demanding circumstance. But again, this tension serves a purpose, and it's supposed to be used in the right way. That we'll talk about how to use our system in the right way for stress to help us. Acute and chronic stress. I'll talk about chronic stress in a few more slides, but think about acute stress for a minute and how important it really is, and how fearful and frightening it can be when it's triggered falsely. So to give an example, if you were in a let's say an event that had a loud noise, could be a car accident or something else that either presented harm to you or someone else, or close call, scary, or think about when you're driving down a 2-lane road and the car swerves, that's coming head on, and swerves and gets back, and you get a jolt. Your body gives you the jolt, right? certain parts of the brain that we'll mention more in depth release those stress hormones. You get cortisol, you get epinephrine or adrenaline, and you get norepinephrine. And these are all heightened states that allow your brain and your body to be hyper. They get you feel that jolt really quickly as that car swerves or that loud noise that happens. And the next time that you hear a loud noise, it could be in your office, it could be at work or at home, and somebody maybe drops something on the floor and it's a loud noise. Automatically, your brain is automatically, without your conscious direction, has given another jolt. And you get the same jolt of stress hormones. It makes you vigilant because the brain says, uh-oh, last time there was a loud noise like this, there was danger. It's looking for danger, getting ready for the fight or flight. And or take, for example, I do trauma work in the work setting, whether it's inpatient or outpatient. If some employee experiences, could be even in an inpatient setting, even in an acute setting, where we have unexpected patient events or an unexpected peer event that happens at work. Somebody becomes really ill and we work on them, or there's fluids that are coming out and we're not used to that in our work setting and trying to respond. The next time people enter into the work setting, sometimes or just go near a building, their brain triggers what it should do. It triggers, hey, last time you were here, this was dangerous. Get the heck away from here. It doesn't differentiate the live now. That's an autonomic function and it's working the way it's supposed to, but it needs our conscious self to come on and talk ourselves and work our way through. No, this is okay. I kind of have this. I know why I'm experiencing this. So if you've ever been in a car accident, you know how difficult that is when you get back into a car, or if you had an event while you were driving, right? So list goes on. Acute stress is really, really important because it gives us a big jolt, because it senses immediate danger and it wants us to do something in our bodily form and in our thought process. Now, I could spend a lot of time here and this is really, really important because this is the whole diagnostics of who we are in our emotional health system. High stress reactions. And these are just principles, basic principles that I want to write down, keep it simple, 3 broad principles. Less control that we either feel we have or that we literally have generally equals emotional struggles, for the lack of a better way to say that. We are creatures who need habit. We need some regular features daily and weekly. We need to be grounded by habits and routines. When we feel we have less control, or we really do have less control, and either the volume of that control is large or the severity, it's a high stakes issue, that concerns us. It's kind of like if you have children and the first time that you dropped your kids off either at a daycare or preschool or school, and you lose that sense of control because they've left your home environment if you were there with them for quite a period of time and somebody else is now in charge. So there's a yippee hooray for that, for part of it. And there's also that sad feature about you're not with them. What are they doing? What are they doing now? What's being said? Are they crying? Are they upset? Are they happy? Right? But then when we think about just loss of control in general, by the way, all anxiety, when I worked with people with generalized anxiety, panic attacks, acute attacks, always related to a sense of control, either at a conscious level or an unconscious level, right? And so really, really important to understand that unwanted change over a long period of time creates dissatisfaction and disengagement. And we can also change that sentence a little bit, say either unwanted change and also unresolved problems, unresolved issues, unresolved struggles, could be relationship, work, health, whatever. At some point, of course, creates dissatisfaction, different levels of dissatisfaction. And then the most dangerous part is disengagement. So disengagement means if you're in a personal relationship and we have some issues we can't work through and they're high stake issues and we're stuck, we tend to disengage because it's just too conflictual to even try to address it. So people will tend to disengage. And then we start to separately live or deal with issues and we don't intimately connect emotionally over these issues and try to problem solve and have resolution. So at some point, life is really all about some compatibilities, right? And that happens in the workplace when we get to this topic of burnout, when people have unwanted change, feel they have a lot less control over a period of time, not only to become dissatisfied, but disengaged, and then feel a sense of apathy, feel a sense sometimes of emotional fatigue. I hear the term compassion fatigue at times, become disenfranchised, disconnected, lose intrinsic kind of value of work. Again, This is a leadership kind of thing. Long-term periods of disengagement due to dissatisfied workers can lead to that. That doesn't mean we can make everybody happy and please people, but even when we express in a strong but compassionate way why we can't do something, or why we've decided not to, even when people don't agree, being clear, being firm, and being compassionate about that decision, that we're not all going to agree, but I don't want to give false hope. So unwanted change over long periods of time, and then lack of problem solving creates a fear-based response. What do I mean by that? It's very frightening as we think of when the pandemic hit, we think about all of a sudden the amount of disruption and change, and we think about, boy, we don't have a backup plan, and all of a sudden schools quarantine or shut down. It becomes panicky because we don't have the same problem solving. So counselors, my counselors in the internal EAP here at Rochester meet with our employees and do short-term personal emotional counsel. They have less problem solving, resolution skills, and creative conversation because the general problem solving resources have been greatly diminished or limited, right? And so when that happens, there's a fear based. Again, we get stress and our brain releases more stress hormones looking for us to be able to be hyper vigilant, aware, to try to solve or respond to whatever the fear or danger is. So we can get into lots of emotional kinds of concerns or disorders that are related to these topics, right? Whether they're at home or they're in society or work or family. So the brain and worry. So here we go with kind of what's really, really a slide we could spend a lot of time on. The brain triggers fear-based bodily reactions that triggers in the central nervous system, as I mentioned. And the amygdala is a organ in the brain that we've heard maybe quite a bit about. It's in the media quite a bit. It's a small organ in the center of our brain, and it elicits these neural impulses and chemicals that are stress hormones when we're worried, when we're concerned. When people start to worry about past or present, things that happen in the past, we think about it, we worry about it, or in the present, the brain will do what it's supposed to do. It will release these hormones to get us to be on guard. The stuff gets us kind of pumped up to say, where's the concerned danger at? And when it does that, we can have chronic problems, obviously, if we stay in a heightened, elevated state of nervousness because people are worrying excessively, or we can be in very acute situations and have more acute attacks. So the brain triggers this based upon our thoughts and our views about what's going on in life. We are feeling-driven people. What do I mean by that? Our brains, which is very, very mysterious, as we just touched on, but it senses how you feel. I'll give some examples. If we think about the dream state for a minute, a lot of the things that we experience in our dream state, and I'll joke with this a lot, that we all are psychotic. We experience psychosis just about every night when we dream, right? We're asleep, we're unconscious in the sense our body's automatic system is taken over to regulate respiration and heart rates and all of our functions. Our brain releases a chemical that prevents us from moving, paralysis, so we don't get out of bed and act out our life that's happening inside of our brains. Our eyes are shut. We're not taking in any stimulus from the outside, so to speak, besides some sound things that may be happening in our home. And our brain creates life, the very essence of life. And it creates often on the basis of how we feel, or even metaphors, how people feel. People say, I just feel so stressed and I'm just so cold and wore out. And they may have dreams that are symbolic of that, but yet they don't know what it means because the part of the brain that tries to put it all together is asleep during the sleep process. And the brain, the reality side is not there to make sense of what we're seeing, is based upon feeling. So people can say, if it just seems like it's raining cats and dogs. They've had dreams where cats and dogs are flying out of the sky. And that's because they had a metaphor that their brain kind of used and turned into a symbolic representation in their dream. Or I'll use this one. I had this one not long ago. When you're struggling with a certain issue or topic, depending on the severity of it, and you feel like you have very little control over it and you're frustrated, and you may not even consciously think about how much it bothers you, but your brain is picking up how much it's bothering you through your feelings. So a common dream that people will have is driving a vehicle. And all of a sudden, they can't control the vehicle. The vehicle will go where it wants to go. I can't stop it. I can't turn it. Now it's going backwards. And you wake up going, what in the world was that? And often I've worked with people who've had that experience and even in my own life, and we're dealing with some issue that they feel out of control. And so the body, the brain, mysterious organ it is, will create a symbolic representation of feeling out of control in the dream. We could go on a lot. Some of you would maybe like that, and others would not. So I'll move on from there. But all suffice to say that this is an incredible organ that registers everything that you're thinking and feeling, and all of our memories are estimated by all of our neuroscience friends and researchers that everything is stored in our brain somewhere. Sometimes it just might be hard to pull it out. As I go through life, there's times where I know it, I just can't get it out. Retrieving it's one thing, but it looks like every piece of information, experience, and emotion especially is stored in our brain. And happy feelings and negative ones are stored. The amygdala, again, that little organ that is shown lots of activity when we're under stress, fear, anxiety, anger, um, elicits this information. And one of the reasons that you may ask is that we tend to remember more things that are problematic than we do sometimes even happy things. Well, there's a good reason for that. That's because to keep us engaged in life and safe, our brains are trying to recall things that are dangerous to prevent us from walking into dangerous situations. Right? So more traumatic activities are remembered because the brain is trying to self-protect us, to say, when you were here, look out. When you ate that, one of my kids, I think, they had a pizza a few weeks ago, and they ended up coincidentally getting a very digestive kind of illness, but thought originally that it was due to food poisoning from the pizza. So now even though I don't think it was, because it was a real common digestive issue going around. But the next time you go to eat pizza, you might have the brain kind of trying to give you a signal of being discomfort, uncomfortable to not eat that because last time you did, maybe you got sick, right? So the brain needs us to do something, by the way. So when I do counseling with people and they have worry, they have issues, they need to do something. Our brains are engaged to do something. If we just worry about something, the only thing your brain can do is say, I wonder what this worry is. Let me give you a little more cortisol. Let me give you a little more stress hormones to get you to figure out what to do. And all along, the person then starts to focus on the bodily responses that are creating stress for them. They're not focusing on the original etiology, the cause of my worry, that my brain is just using its algorithms to give me a little more stress. And so it's unfortunate that we don't always understand the system and that we end up paying attention to part of the system, not the whole system, and we struggle immensely. So the brain needs our conscious self to come on and say, wait a second, I know what that loud noise is. No wonder I got a jolt. No wonder I got that jolt. And I'll share a quick story. My kids were young and I was on the tilt-a-whirl. When I was young enough to be able to ride rides and not get vertigo, not get dizzy and sick. Now, about 6 months earlier to that, riding the round little ride, what was its name? The tilt-a-whirl. I was in a car accident in the Chicago suburbs, and I was in the middle of an intersection turning left. Long story short, car was kind of trying to beat that yellow light. I was in the middle of the intersection with yellow turning red. They caught the tail end of me and spun me around in the intersection. Thank goodness I wasn't hurt bad, nor was the person, because she hit the tail end of my car versus dead center on. As you know, the outcome would have been a little different. I spun around, hit the traffic light. Now, in that moment of spinning around, the brain slows down real life time. As strange as that is, a whole nother presentation. And in that split second, I remember thinking, oh no, I just had a new transmission put in this car. My insurance rates are going to go up. Oh no, this is our second car. What are we going to do? All that in a split second, I remember thinking that. 6 months later, I'm at a carnival with my young child. think there was one or two of them, and there was another child. There was four of us on this tilt-a-whirl, and we're spinning around and around and around. And you might guess by now that all of a sudden I started to get a rapid heart rate. Respiration went up. I started getting sweaty. I could feel my galvic skin response, my perception of, oh my gosh, what is happening here? And the blood diverted my stomach, of course, because it's getting ready for some danger. And so my muscles are getting a big supply of oxygen, and I start to tremble a little bit because your muscles are constricting, of course, getting ready to fight or flight. And I thought, oh my gosh, I'm having a heart attack on the tilt-a-whirl. How awful. And what I realized, it took me a minute to go, oh no, this is exactly what I know, but now it's happening to me. My brain thinks I'm in danger because of the what? The spinning, the vertigo. The last time that I had spun, I was in a life or death feeling situation. And my brain said, get out of there. And it was a very powerful experience for me because I was young, but I already had started doing counseling with people who had panic attacks and anxiety. And I was able to relate somewhat to what those experiences were like, and being able to know in foolproof form for me exactly what the brain is doing when we have traumatic kinds of incidents, and that we're not often aware of because we focus on the symptom, and because the symptoms are very frightening and they're very scary. Lots of people end up in ER over those symptoms, right? And we think there's something clearly wrong with us somewhere in the body that people are missing. So we need to have a good medical check. But all right, so more and more to say. If you're worried about an event coming up and you just worry about the event coming up and you don't do some action planning for backup or information, then you're just going to get lots of stress reactions and you're going to feel very giddy in a bad way. Not in a good giddy way. In a giddy way, I should say, you use the word giddy, you're going to feel stressful, kind of giddy, not a happy giddy, right? You're going to feel a little strange over it because your brain is just says, I don't know what to do about it. As opposed to if I'm worried about the weather and have a big event, maybe I need to have a backup plan. Do I have a backup plan? Maybe I can call around. Do we need a tent? How much is the tent going to cost just in case it rains? Do we have a backup plan to use somebody else's facility? Then the brain will calm down because the brain has been built to be able to go into action, and it takes our conscious self to work with the automatic self that's in the brain. The brain does a lot of talking without us being aware of what's going on inter parts of the brain. So chronic stress that I mentioned a while ago, chronic stress is a result of, a modern society. Why are we so stressed out as people? I don't know about some of you, but I'm going to age myself a little bit. Sometimes I just want a little bit of the imaginary, even though it was false, I guess, imaginary Mayberry. Or some of you may remember that show from the 60s. I grew up with it as a kid. We even watched reruns of it in the 70s. It's still on reruns today, the Andy Griffith Show, and a little bit of Mayberry. And where life seemed, even though they had plenty of stress for their time, everything is relevant, but life seemed just a little bit calmer. With Gomer is fixing your car, the front porch on Sundays, homemade ice cream, a little bit of dessert and pie, and trying to not go to work. And actually, I remember in those days, gas stations were closed in the 60s and early 70s on Sundays. Hospitals were about the only thing open. Grocery stores weren't open where I lived in the far north suburbs in Illinois of Chicago. A lot of things were closed in the 60s and 70s. And our lives now are very busy. We have two people that are a high percent of two people working outside the home, which means just double kind of work and exhaustion for that. We have kids in homework and school. We have a time when I was a kid, Dad said you could be in one sport at a time, and it had to be the season sport. And even when my kids were young, all of a sudden we have multiple sports at one time people are in, and we have seasons that are off. We're doing football camps in the winter inside and summer agility camps, and we're doing baseball, fall ball, and we're doing baseball, summer ball, and the list goes on. And we have people that are, and if we don't do it, then the kid doesn't have a chance to make the team because it's so competitive, right? And so we're running everywhere. We're spending lots of money, physical, laborious kinds of tasks for us. Trying to find time for self becomes a high commodity that just doesn't exist. When people say time I get for myself is now it's 9:30 and I finally got the kids in bed, and I fall in bed, right? So we're very stressed out. We have a high tech society. We have tech issues that stress us out. People on the road stress us out. There's another topic, just being on the highway. What has happened to highway driving? What has happened to our rules of the road? Boy, I could go on that one for a while. So modern society is structured in a way, it seems like, to give us many benefits and gains, many good things, but many challenges. I call it the polarity of life, right? Anything that potentially can be good, technology, life, relationships, health, everything you can think of can also be potentially challenging or not so good. Our health can change, our relationships can change, work can change. It's the polarity of life, everything in between, potential to do good, potential as human beings not to do good. It's the same people. I've done things where you wonder how in the world, why would I say or do that, right? We all have the propensity along the continuum, depending on our emotional states and where we're at. Our personality features drive our stress too, by the way. People don't like to talk about this, but certain personality features, some brains, and it looks like the neuroscience I'll talk about after the break, shows that the brain structures are different and that some people are geared to feel negativity more frequently than others at a deeper level. Other people who report kind of being a little happier and less negative. There's a term for that called neuroticism, and it's a term you don't hear very much. And all it really means in psychology is that the amount of negative emotions, experiences someone would feel, right? And some people I know and some people you know, they tend to can go 0 to 10 pretty quickly with either anger or negativity or something that's not considered a positive or pleasant emotion. Something that might be a mild or moderate stress level for them could be a moderate to major stress level. And it's just a feature of who they are and trying to work with that and manage that, right? And there are ways to do that. There are mindful things to do, specific things when people really are interested in managing that. But it's a feature to talk about. Some people are more agreeable. Some people are defensive and argumentative and more more expressive of their frustration. Extroverts versus introverts. Some people are a little more easygoing, agreeableness, or not as picky. I've gone out to when I've traveled, and I'm not a restaurant connoisseur, but some people are, and they will ask 20 questions of the waiter or waitress that I don't even know what to ask, but they'll ask all these questions and say, no, I don't want that. No, I don't want that, because they are very, very, for their personality structure, very specific about what they want, which is absolutely fine. Whereas I'm like, let me taste it. I'll see what it's like. So we are very different in our personality structures, and stress is related to our personality structure and features, obviously, as I've mentioned. And self-compassion is needed. Self-compassion basically just means, are we able to apply, for those who are hard on ourselves, apply some gentleness, some forgivingness to ourselves as being, how does it go again? To err is human, to forgive is divine. And it's hard to forgive ourselves. You know, it's interesting, especially when I think of all the people at work I talk about. There's some people that coworkers will tell me, but about personal life too, say, if this person just felt bad once in a while, but it's never their fault, it's always somebody else. So we tend to see is sometimes that people who should have a little self-introspective often don't. The arrow points outward. And then we see people who beat themselves up way too much when they shouldn't beat themselves way too much. They tend to be their own worst enemy. Interesting how that works. So self-compassion is something that's really needed about how do we actually apply kind of care to ourselves in the way that we do for other people, apply that to ourselves for people who are kind of structured that way. I want to talk about a couple things. Burnout, and I won't spend a lot of time, but this is important. Burnout is not a medical condition or diagnosis, right? Burnout, and I just have a couple quick definitions here from World Health Organization, defines as a syndrome caused from an occupational phenomenon. And that's important to realize, that an occupational phenomenon. Burnout can have symptoms. It has medical symptoms, by the way, but when we talk about burnout, we're talking about the origins or cause, something related to self and or the workplace that we happen to be in. Mayo Clinic, one of our resources here at Mayo Clinic, Healthy Lifestyle Adult Health, special type of stress related to our physical or emotional exhaustion. It's also a sense of reduced accomplishment, a loss of personal identity. So, you know, it says work-related stress, and that can be general to the group or it could be specific based upon who you or your coworker are, their kind of wiring. I'll talk about that in a minute. But really important that it's a special kind of work-related issue, right? I've worked in jobs where when I was younger that I really, really liked, and I've worked in other jobs where I couldn't wait to get the resume together, right? Because this isn't a good match for me. And probably you've experienced that too. And when something's not a good match, I mentioned earlier about compatibility, whether it's in relationships, we don't have perfect compatibility, but we have to have some reasonable, large pieces of compatibility. Otherwise, everything is ripe for frustration or conflict, right? So we have to have some compatibility. And when we don't have compatibility, we have to find ways to be able to kind of chalk that up to, hey, I don't have to have everything. I don't have to agree with everything. I just have to have kind of the things that I need to do and respond. Possible causes to this burnout phenomenon: lack of control, job performance, work, some life concerns. Do I bring work home with me? As I listen to some people who can't seem to turn work off, either physically they have to do work, or they ruminate about work or what's happening. And the lack of intrinsic work reward. The intrinsic is just doing something because you really like it. And it's nice when we get to do a job that you just like in the process of doing it, like a hobby. You do something because you don't really focus just on the outcome of the hobby, but you like the hobby. You like the state of the sewing or the artwork or the woodworking or the cooking or the weaving or whatever it is that you do. You like doing it. You like the outcome, but you also like the process. So some people have jobs like that. Other people, not so much. Depends on what kind of work we have, right? But when we lose that sense of some value about our work, that leads to burnout. A couple of our male physicians here I quoted, and this is really important. Burnout's a problem that takes a toll on healthcare practitioners and organizations, as well as patients they serve. People in healthcare organizations both have a role to play in preventing burnout. However, increasing research, and here's a key part, suggests that burnout interventions targeted at organizational level may be more effective than interventions targeted at individual well-being and resilience. So this is something I've talked a lot. I work with Dr. Kauser as one of the co-authors of this. We work together a lot, and we've talked about this for years. And to me, it's interesting because the research finally pans that out. But depending on the driver, back to the diagnostics of burnout, depends on where we need to intervene. And often we need to intervene at organizational level because it could be organizational drivers of effectiveness and efficiencies in job tasks, protocols, and procedures that may impact our workability and how we feel about it. So it's really, really important to look at the commonsensical, not just focusing on self-care. Nothing wrong with self-care. And I'll share in a minute how that can inflame some people. Just another picture here to depict kind of the burning piece over here, the drivers of in the research that says these things: excess workload, inefficiencies of how we do our job, loss of flexibility, either how we do our work or flexibility of schedule, time away. Some people can't get time away. That'll really make you feel a loss of control when you really need a day off. Work-life integration, loss of meaning, these things can lead again to that picture. Now, I'll end kind of on this. So here's what I mean. When we have a burnout situation where somebody has that fatigue, exhaustion, frustration, it's impacting them at all levels, it's either due to the way work is structured globally, that multiple people have similar problems. That's kind of a hint that we have an organizational systems issue, or it's isolative to an individual or to a few people. And that's really important because some people are going to be burnt out no matter where they work. It may have little to do with the system. It has more to do with the complexities of their own perception, their cognition, and their own central nervous system, their views and perceptions of the workplace and what should change and what shouldn't. So it's really important, that diagnostic piece, because if it's an individual, issue, then the best the organization can do at times is to encourage self-care and give resource management. On the other hand, that could really be frustrating if I'm an individual, and it's obvious, it's widespread frustration, burnout with many different processes at work. And we encourage people just to do self-care. We don't encourage them to look at the system from a leadership. That'll create a lot of animosity and resentment as well. So critically important when we look at workflow, if you're in leadership, workflow policies and procedures, it could drive some of the sentiment we're seeing in workers. I should back up and just mention, I didn't say this, physician burnout. I'm not talking about physician burnout specifically today, but the research on that shows that physician burnout's even higher than the general public and other occupations, has a very high rate. And I just wanted to mention that and mention that I believe organizations are trying now to focus more, and this is what the research in the article here is kind of referring, that organizations have to look at what the organization is doing to help physicians in their burnout, just like you would any other healthcare worker employee. Before I end, I'll say I do a lot of work outside of Mayo, or I've done a lot of work outside of Mayo in my career, and I was doing a series of presentations to leadership of another healthcare facility, not Mayo, and they'd asked me to come and talk about this topic a number of years ago, stress and burnout and resilience. And as I was doing the presentation, the CEO was in the crowd, physician CEO, and he said, look, my question for you as a presenter is, how in the world do we prevent this stuff when we're overworked, overdriven, over volume of stuff, patient complexity, we're working at home, our marriages, relationships are suffering, we suffer emotionally, tell us how we fix that. And I almost said, well, if I knew how to fix that, I'd be traveling the world right now. I would have been on Oprah many times and traveling the world and probably on my 10th book. What he actually addressed was the fact that that's kind of more your issue. Your issue in leadership, when you have a systemic issue within the system that looks like it's leading to you and all of the other physicians in the group feeling burnt out, then we need to look at what those drivers are, right? And it was a really telling message for me, and hopefully for some of them, how important it is not just to focus on self-care, which is important, of course, but to focus on organizational drivers and issues. So we'll come back, we'll talk about management. Those in you in leadership, I've been doing a lot of these talks about resilience and what does that actually mean in a practical, pragmatic way. I never do a presentation without wanting to give people steps as they leave the presentation that they can implement right away. So we'll talk about what that means, and specifically complaint management, and a little bit about having very uncomfortable conversations with disagreements with employees.
Thank you for participating. Please click the button below to complete the evaluation and obtain credit.